All right, we're all looking forward to the Oscars Sunday night on RTV6, and tonight we're also taking a look back. RTV6's Jason Fechner travels back 30 years thanks to a documentary that examines the history of Hoosiers. Jason.
We should have popcorn on standby over the next few days for all these stories, Todd. Hard to believe now that it's been 3 decades since Hoosiers hit theaters, and an Indiana man liked it so much that he retraced all of its steps shot for shot. Michael Watson's a factory worker who is also an amateur filmmaker. He went to most of the film sites where the cast and crew filmed Hoosiers all across central Indiana back in the fall of '85 and synced his own shots with the movie for a film he titled Hoosiers Revisited. While it's a relatively limited sample size, he says the movie Hoosiers represents the state of Indiana perfectly.
It's one of the greatest sports films of all time, if not one of the greatest films of all time. I grew up watching it with my family, and being from Indiana, and I played basketball in high school, and everyone can relate to the Cinderella story.
Yes, we can, and we're going to have much more on Hoosiers this Sunday morning on our annual Indianapolis This Week Oscars special. Plus, we're going to take you to several historic Indiana theaters, including the Art Craft in Franklin. We'll explore Indiana's tie to Oscar contender The Revenant and get some insight into the Indiana history of one of the stars of the new Star Wars film. That's Sunday morning at 8:30 right here on Indianapolis This Week.
I look forward to that. Thank you, Jason. Remember, RTV6 is the only place where you can watch the Oscars on Sunday. It all begins with coverage of the red carpet at 5. Then at 8:30, watch the Oscars live with Chris Rock as the host. We'll break down the winners, funniest moments, and best dressed Monday morning on Good Morning Indiana and Good Morning America.
It is one of, if not the most iconic of films shot in Indiana. Hoosiers, originally released in theaters in November of 1986, it scored 2 Oscar nominations for Dennis Hopper for supporting actor and for the music in the score. Now, 30 years later, the movie continues to shine brightly in the media spotlight. The ultimate underdog film that truly stands the test of time.
Every Hoosier knows the story of Hoosiers. Inspired by the 1954 state champions in Milan, the movie, shot across Indiana in the fall of '85, introduced the world to the fictional town of Hickory and the real-life love Indiana has for basketball.
Grew up watching it with my family, and being from Indiana, and I played basketball in high school, and everyone can relate to the Cinderella story, right?
Michael Watson, a Hoosier through and through.
I'm a factory worker. I work at Nestle.
Was inspired in part by those iconic characters that he grew up watching on the big screen as a child.
It's one of the greatest sports films of all time, if not one of the greatest films of all time. And I had heard the story of Bobby Plump, with Milan, and, we've all dreamed of making that last-second shot.
So inspired by the movie was Watson that he made his own movie about the filming of Hoosiers.
We are in Knightstown, Indiana, and that's where the gym is. And so I'm taking a tour of the gym, and I'm like, wow, this is where, Gene Hackman was, and Morris, and you can stand in the footsteps of these players and the filmmakers. And I thought, wow, I wonder what the other locations look like today, if they still exist. And that's kind of how it was born.
Watson set off a couple of years ago framing up shots throughout Hinkle and in filming sites in places like New Richmond, Knightstown, Nineveh, and Lebanon.
I have this fascination kind of with nostalgia. There's places we've all been, or we grew up, like the house we grew up in. We might not live there anymore, but I like to think about those places still exist.
Recreating the history of the film for Hoosiers Revisited, a brief documentary that Watson simply posted to YouTube, a simple fan film, no expectations. But then,
a couple days later, a friend of mine said, hey, it's on a Sports Illustrated website, so you're going to get a lot of views. Oh, okay, great. And then before you know it, it just kind of started, it went on ESPN, it went on Forbes.
Since then, Watson's met with or talked to the writer, the actors, the director, all appreciative of his work.
The director and the writer of the film both said thank you, because they hadn't been to those locations in 25, 30 years. I mean, a long time. They hadn't been back.
And in a small way, he's now become a part of the ongoing story of the movie that lives on to this day.
It's very well polished. in every detail. There was a big deal to the writer and director. It had to be right on. So yeah, I think it's timeless. I think you could, in another 20 or 30 years, I think people will still be talking about that film.
That's actually Michael's father there with him in that last shot. And we'll include a link for you to watch Hoosiers Revisited with this story right now through the RTV6 app.